So dudes, it's Tuhu. As some of you may know, I was on Tectone's Gacha cast some time ago with several others like Braxophone, Poki, and Io, and one of the topics was how to criticize Genshin Impact properly. I wasn't able to adequately answer that question then, but I think I can now with a proper video like this one. First things first though, if you don't know me, my name is Asian Psycho, aka ToeSniper98, but again, you can just call me Tuhu. I'm a certified gacha addict who plays and maintains 10 different gacha games at once, as you might be able to tell from the screen, with Genshin being one of them, and I plan to pick up even more gacha games in the future as they come out. Last year I made a video called How to Improve Genshin Impact, in which I went over all the ways I could think of to make Genshin a better game. Most people can only criticize Genshin for its flaws, but not as many people can elaborate on how they think they can make it better, which basically goes for any time people criticize things on the internet, not just Genshin to be fair. But in this case, as someone who's got more experience with gacha games than most, I mean, again, just look at my screen right now, I want to offer my suggestions on how to make Genshin Impact better, even if the chances of any of these actually happening is basically zero. Well, actually, I did ask for an update to the party screen in last year's video, and they actually did it with the Fontaine update, so I have that hopium at least. I do want to disclose that a lot of the things I'm going to talk about here are just recycled from the video I made last year. Well, would it surprise you to know that MiHoYo did not, in fact, implement most of my suggestions, so here they are again. Matter of fact, I'm just going to tell you straight up, I'm basically just updating that video and reposting it since I feel like right now is a good time for it to be relevant again, especially because, coincidentally, Wuthering Waves is having another closed beta right now, just like last year. So if you'd like to watch that previous video, then the link will be down in the description. I've categorized my critiques into 4 chapters: exploration, gameplay, farming/progression, and gacha, microtransactions, and other miscellaneous concerns. In addition, I'll also timestamp each individual criticism in a pinned comment below so you can easily jump around to a specific critique that you might be interested in hearing. Let's start with exploration. This is the shortest chapter since overall, obviously, MiHoYo does an amazing job with exploration in Genshin already, but still, there are some things that I want to suggest that can make exploration even better. Increase the portable waypoint cap and increase their duration from 1 week to 2, maybe even 3. The portable waypoint is an item that you can make at the crafting table, and it's basically a teleporter that you can place anywhere you want on the map, where you can either stand or swim underwater. For some reason, you can't place one if you're just treading water on the surface. To be perfectly honest, we should have had a higher portable waypoint cap to begin with. Even back at the start of Genshin, there were areas of Mondstadt and Liyue that were pretty annoying to get to since the nearest teleporter was still a decent distance away. And this issue only got worse and worse with time. Since Genshin is known for its exploration, MiHoYo obviously wants to make exploration more and more elaborate as time goes on, so naturally they've come out with bigger and bigger expansions over the years. The mountains of Inazuma, the rainforests and deserts of Sumeru, and the waters of Fontaine. We keep getting more and more points of interest, but we also aren't getting more portable waypoint limits to keep up, which is a shame since they're such a useful tool for navigating around the map, but there's only so much you can do when you can only use one at a time. Improve movement mechanics or introduce new ones for a better, smoother, and more exciting exploration experience. Some characters like Mona and Ayaka have an elemental sprint that lets them surf across water, and others like Yelan, Sayu, Wanderer, Kazuha, Venti, and most recently Shenyun have skills that give them great horizontal or vertical coverage, or both. The issue here is that skills like these that are really good for exploration are locked to specific characters, and they're all limited, so you have to gacha for them. Not only that, but like I mentioned earlier, new region expansions are getting bigger and more elaborate over time, so having something like Yelan's skill is becoming more and more essential. Sure, each region does have something that helps with exploration, like tethers and stuff like that, but they're only meant for certain areas of those regions. You can't just use them whenever you want. And soon, we're gonna start getting more of what I call Genshin clones, like Wuthering Waves and Arknight's Enfield. Quick disclosure, by the way, I actually don't use that term as an insult, it's just easier to refer to, open world anime gacha RPGs as Genshin clones since, Genshin made it popular. Anyway, the reason why I bring up these Genshin clones is because they may start offering better exploration mechanics themselves. Wuwa, for example, has mechanics that make exploration and traversal easier, like wall running, jumping up vertical slopes really high, and even a grappling hook. So ideally, I'd like MiHoYo to implement new universal movement mechanics into Genshin so that way it can keep up with newer games like Wuwa and prevent its own exploration experience from getting too stale. Maybe add its own version of wall running or hyper jumps. Hell, it can even take Wuwa's grappling hook and make its own version of that. In case some of you guys are concerned that if Genshin does something like this, where it takes something from another game and makes its own version of it, then it'll start losing its uniqueness or identity, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Games of similar genres can share a lot of mechanics and still feel very different from one another. For example, ask a Halo player if Halo is the same thing as Call of Duty now, just because the later Halo games have a dedicated sprint button, and see how they react. So even if Genshin takes stuff from other games, which that's kind of what I want it to do given most of the suggestions I'm going to be making throughout this video, as long as it puts its own spin to them, it should be fine. I mean, that's exactly what they've done with a lot of our event minigames we've had over the years anyway. Oh, and while we're at it, make gliding better too. Increase the base movement speed of gliding, make turning in midair easier and faster, let players switch to other characters in midair, and remove the stamina cost of gliding, since I've always thought that made no sense when your wing glider in Genshin is literally a separate device that's attached to your character's back or whatever. At least in Breath of the Wild and now in Wuthering Waves, your character physically holds onto their gliders, so at least in those games it makes sense that they cost stamina. And speaking of stamina, increase the stamina bar that characters use to dash, sprint, climb, and glide. The only region that gave you stamina increases was Mondstadt, and we haven't gotten any since. Like, I get that MiHoYo probably intends for us to only have a certain amount of stamina, and if we got more, that would obviously be very strong, since then at that point we can just spam dodges a lot more. And yes, I'm aware that we have food items that restore stamina immediately when you eat them, but I still think we should get more stamina increases regardless, since that would make exploration a lot less tedious. And if MiHoYo ever does introduce new movement mechanics to Genshin, a higher stamina cap would go hand in hand with them, so that way MiHoYo can better balance these new mechanics. Also, it just kind of sucks that you get all your stamina increases from the first region in Mondstadt and you get no more afterwards, since you kind of expect to get more stamina increases the more regions you visit, but then realize, wait a minute, that's it, you're not getting any more. Minor gripe here, and they'll probably never get rid of it, but I want MiHoYo to remove the stupid bubble diaper. Like, what exactly are you even trying to censor anyway? Like, pardon me for sounding like a creep for a second, but considering you can't even upskirt Ayaka and Miko anymore since they don't even have visible underwear like they used to in their original designs, what is the actual point of this? Like, yes, obviously this is censorship, it's a Chinese game after all, and the CCP is constantly breathing down MiHoYo's necks, I get that. But what makes this especially egregious for me is that back when MiHoYo censored Mona, Jean, Amber, and Rosaria by giving them alternate outfits that are, mandatory on the Chinese server, they gave those to all their overseas servers as optional outfits that you can swap back and forth from. In other words, you have the choice to pick which outfit you want for those characters at any time. Not to mention, Jean's and Rosaria's censored outfits at least look cool. But you don't have a choice with the bubble diaper as far as I'm aware. You have to deal with it anytime you go swimming in Fontaine unless you mod it out. And they look dumb. At least make it a toggle for any non-Chinese server player, so that way you're consistent with your censorship. Another personal gripe here, let players relight the flames that used to light up the mausoleum in the Hypostyle desert. When you get here initially from the rainforest part of Sumeru, the mausoleum is easily the coolest landmark in the entire desert because of the flames that crown the top of the pyramid. However, if you finish the mausoleum side quest, the flames are extinguished forever, and as far as I'm aware, there's no way to bring them back. This is one of the biggest disappointments of Genshin's exploration in my opinion. The whole point of exploration in this game is to run around and take in the amazing and beautiful sights that the game has to offer, and the mausoleum was one of the best ones, especially when you visit it at night. So the fact that you remove one of the best landscapes in the whole game when you complete the Hypostyle desert storyline is a downright travesty and honestly an insult to the beauty of the game. Maybe there's lore behind why the flames go away. I didn't pay attention to the story much myself, and maybe if I had, I might understand why they did, but even if I did know, that still wouldn't be enough to make up for the fact that I'll never be able to see one of the most badass environments in Genshin ever again, unless of course I take the time to mod it back in. What makes this even worse is that you can actually see the mausoleum all the way from Fontaine because it's such a huge structure. I would imagine if you never did the mausoleum questline, you'd still be able to see the flames on it all the way from Fontaine too, which would be even more badass. So yeah, it'd be nice if we could have an in-game toggle to set the mausoleum on fire again. My last suggestion for exploration is to reset chests. This used to be a meme actually, back when the game first came out, when people would claim that chests reset, which unfortunately they did not and they still don't. However, I think that they should actually reset occasionally, so that way players can have an additional source of Primo Gems that they can farm that's available to everyone. How I think it should work goes like this. Every 2 weeks or maybe every month, month, a fixed number of chests should randomly respawn either in each region or throughout the whole map. If it's for the whole map, then the game should tell you how many spawned in each region, but it shouldn't tell you exactly where because that's what you have the treasure compass for. However, these chests themselves should not be hard to find, either in areas where chests originally spawned when you explore an area for the first time, or have a set of possible spawn points where they could be, like the blue rocks do. Ideally, I'd like it to be a monthly reset that gives players an extra multi or two's worth of primo gems, let's say, because that way it won't feel like an absolute chore to do, as it might be if it were like a weekly thing, but I don't know, maybe some of you guys would prefer a bi-weekly reset like Abyss instead. Oh, and before I forget, one big exploration idea that I think would be really cool that I want to add here at the end is to add basically a dark world for Genshin. When we finally get all 7 regions, so after Natlin and Snechnaya, maybe as a part of a transition into Genshin's next major story arc, miHoYo could go back and add Dark World or Abyss versions, if you will, of each region, either all at once or several regions at a time. Games like Super Meat Boy have this feature where you can enter Dark World versions of stages that are similar to the originals but have different gameplay elements and, of course, a darker aesthetic. Given that in Genshin you have to deal with the Abyss Order and people like Dainsleif and more recently Skirk exist, I'd say having a Dark World for Genshin would fit right in. Okay, next up are the gameplay related suggestions, and to segue you from the exploration section, first up is to put in a dark mode option for loading screens. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It would be nice to have some dark mode loading screens so that way we don't constantly flashbang ourselves every time we teleport somewhere. For some story suggestions, add the Atlas Fate function from Star Rail to Genshin. For those of you who don't play Star Rail, the Atlas Fate is basically a story timeline where you can look at all of the game's events in chronological order if you'd like to get an idea of how the stories progress so far, and I think this would be especially useful for Genshin. Even if you're not exactly a Genshin lore enthusiast, it'd still be nice to have a general idea of Genshin events whenever you're curious. And while we're at it, give Genshin a proper story playback or archive function. Right now, you can't play back actual story scenes in Genshin. The most you can do is replay the voice lines that happen in story. If you want to watch the actual scenes themselves again, you'll have to go to YouTube to go watch whatever someone else recorded for you. This is a staple of gacha games, having proper story playback that lets you reread or rewatch story scenes whenever you want to, so it's pretty disappointing that Genshin doesn't have this, especially because it has no story skip button. And guess what? That's the next thing. Add a story skip button. I already explained my position on this matter pretty exhaustively on why there should be a story skip function in last year's video, so I'll have the timestamp up on screen now if you want to go listen to my rant about it. But the basic point is that Genshin should have a skip button so that players can choose whether or not they want to pay attention to the story. I think that miHoYo should not force people to pay attention to the story if they don't want to. Even though they do put in a ton of effort into the story, that still doesn't change the fact that there are a lot of Genshin players out there who just do not care about it at all, and trying to force them to read it won't get them to suddenly start caring about it, and if anything, it'll just do the exact opposite and make them not like it. That and story skip is another staple of gacha games that virtually all other gacha games have. Even FGO, whose story I consider personally to be the best in the entire gacha market, gives you the option to skip its entire story if you don't care for it. So the fact that Genshin doesn't is also, again, quite disappointing because it comes off as miHoYo forcing you to read the story. Give the Traveler more voiced dialogue. I understand that the Traveler is meant to be a self-insert for players. I mean, pretty much all gacha games do this, but I don't quite get why there should be a reason to leave the vast majority of Traveler's lines unvoiced, especially now that we have Star Rail, where the Trailblazer actually has a decent amount of voiced lines. Or in other words, I'd like to see Traveler actually interact more with other Genshin characters and not just constantly have Paimon be their floating talking Rosetta Stone 99% of the time. Open up a direct route to Inazuma. Currently, you can go almost anywhere you want in Genshin, even when you first start the game. You can walk to Liyue and even Sumeru, and while I don't know exactly when you gain access to this, you eventually gain access to this teleporter that leads straight up to Fontaine. Hell, apparently you don't even need that teleporter. Now that we have Chenyu Vale, you can walk to a Wave Rider spawn point there and sail up to the eastern Fontaine harbor to get into Fontaine 2 if you really want to. The only region that does not allow this is Inazuma, since there are storms surrounding it that prevent you from entering even if you try to take the wave router down there, so you have to clear Liyue's story in order to get to Inazuma. Not only is it strange that this is the only place you can't go to immediately, since, again, you get a teleporter that puts you right at the doorstep of Fontaine, our latest region, compared to Inazuma, which you've had for at least the past 2 years, but new players who end up rolling any of the Inazuma characters are hard stuck trying to level them up since they can't farm from the materials until they get to Inazuma in the story. And again, no story skip button means that they're going to be gated from doing Inazuma stuff for a while. Sure, they could try going into co-op to farm those Inazuma materials from other people's accounts if they really want to, but the point is that players should be able to go wherever they want. It would be one thing if, as a new player, you couldn't just walk straight into Liyue or Sumeru, or if they never made that teleporter that takes you straight to Fontaine, and you had to complete the story of each preceding region first before you could go to the next one, because at least then it would be consistent, but again, it's not like that, so I don't see a reason why you can't just go straight to Inazuma too. Optimize the questing process in 2 areas in particular, the recommended quest prerequisite and the character overlap restriction. Zajev put out a tweet earlier this month with this wonderful experience trying to clear recommended story quests in order to do Lantern Rite, as you can see here. There's nothing wrong with the game recommending you to do other quests first, since that'll give you some context to whatever you're trying to do now, but if there ends up being an entire rabbit hole of story quests that you end up having to do when all you're trying to do is whatever the current quest was, that's pretty ridiculous and needs to be optimized. And remove the character overlap restriction mechanic in quests. This is one of the dumbest things I've seen in a gacha game, legit. The fact that if you're in the middle of one quest, you can't start doing another one if both quests share a particular character. Like, what? To be fair, I believe now you have the option to pause one quest line so that you can go do another, but I believe the character overlap restriction still exists, and if it does, then they need to get rid of it. I think that you should be able to do any quest at any time and in any order you want. Now, onto some actual gameplay stuff, starting with constellations. Add the ability to toggle constellations for all characters. Obviously, C6 Bennett comes to mind, but it would be nice to have the option to toggle constellations on and off if people want to give themselves a challenge and run a C0 character, even if they do have more constellations for them, or if they just want to compare the difference in power. Add a second skill for all characters, both 4 and 5 stars. Adding a second skill will give characters more gameplay depth and breathe new life into older characters that players have been using for a long time. Originally, I was going to suggest that characters should still be able to only use one skill at a time, and that you would need to pick which skill you want them to have outside of combat, but then I realized that if that's the case, then a lot of characters will end up having, quote, meta skills that are just better than the other, or one skill is just so obviously weaker than the other that it's just not worth using, so I figure having both of them at the same time will be better for the overall gameplay experience. I also understand that having to come up with a second skill will put a lot more work on the devs, since it's a whole extra skill that they have to design, playtest, and bug fix. I can only imagine what kind of hell Shinyan put the devs through, so I think it's okay if they come out with second skills in batches, as in implement second skills for several characters at a time every patch cycle or something. It's not something they need to get done all at once, this is something that they should take their time with. I also want to see second elemental bursts, or ults, but I don't think every character needs a second one like skills. Maybe only the 5 stars get them or something, I don't know, or maybe certain characters. Tartaglia, for example, has 2 different ults, so there's a precedent for that at least. Related to this, miHoYo should also buff the older and weaker characters in the game. As a lot of us know, Zhongli is still to this day the only character to get buffed after his release, and they haven't touched anyone else they put on the live servers. There are different ways of going about this. You can go the FGO route, where some characters have these interlude or rank up quests that you have to do to upgrade a skill or MP. You can go the Girls Frontline or Azure Lane route, where you spend a lot of resources on a character who has an upgrade available, and it gives them a new skin, rarity increase, more stats, and a new skill. Or you can go the Arknights route, which is a bit of both, where certain characters have access to a module that they can equip or unequip at will, that gives them more stats and changes certain elements of their gameplay, and you have to complete certain prerequisites and spend resources to unlock them. For Genshin in particular, I think the best way to buff characters is to give them a story quest that you have to complete in order to upgrade them, and this could be how you give characters their second skills or even ults that I suggested earlier. And on the topic of buffing characters, buff the Traveler's weaker elements and remove the elemental resonance mechanic. Right now, the Traveler's strongest element by far is Dendro, to the point where there's no reason to switch to any of the others. And speaking of switching, you shouldn't have to go to a statue of the region whose element you want to switch to as Traveler. You should just be able to switch it at will wherever you want, like you can in Star Rail. I don't really care that it's lore appropriate or not. I mainly care about player convenience, and at the moment, switching elements of the Traveler is not convenient. Add more unique elemental interactions for certain characters. The best example that comes to mind is Nilo and her Super Bloom mechanic. Basically, I want more interactions like that in the game, where characters put their own twists on certain reactions. Not all characters need to do this obviously, but it'd be nice to have more characters who can do what Nilo does, especially if they can make the weaker elemental reactions we have in the game stronger. And before you ask, as much as I love my Navia, no, she does not count because she only uses the crystallized shards as a resource and doesn't actually change anything about the reaction itself. Add more weapon types and possibly even subtypes to the game. We've had the core 5 weapon types for the last 3 years, so I think it's about time we got some more. The 2 main additions I want to suggest are knives and, forgive me, I'm American, guns. I was gonna suggest gauntlets or brass knuckles, things like that, for brawler type characters, but I'm not too sure how well that would go, since we already have Hazo and Ridsley who use catalysts. I also think it'd be cool for weapons to be divided into subtypes or subclasses too, and these subtypes or subclasses should give different kinds of small buffs or perks that give some more gameplay depth to your characters. If knives ever get added to Genshin, for example, different knife subtypes should do slightly different things. Daggers, stilettos, butterflies, karambits, even machetes if you want to count those, can do things like being able to break shields faster or give extra stats like a bit more crit rate or something. And if we don't end up getting more main weapon types, at least take this weapon subtype idea and apply it to the weapons we already have. So for example, for claymores, you can add warhammers, for spears you can add quarterstaffs, and for bows you can add crossbows. And related to this is to introduce characters who can use different weapon types at a time. By this, I don't mean characters like, Tartaglia or Mika or Raiden, who use different weapons technically, but they're mainly just animation fluff. I mean characters who can equip different types of main weapons on their profiles themselves that change their gameplay based on what weapon they're using. Again, doesn't need to be too many characters like that, it'd just be cool to have them. Now, time for the heavy hitters of this category, endgame expansions. Everyone talks about how Genshin doesn't have endgame, but how many people have ideas about what that endgame should look like? Well, I've got a couple ideas myself, so here we go. Let's start with Abyss. They could allow co-op and food buffs for floors 9 to 12, and they could add a new set of floors, 13 to 16 let's say, that also reset every 2 weeks like 9 to 12 do. Floors 13 to 16 could be like what 9 to 12 is now. Solo only, no food buffs, but the enemies are stronger, and for floor 16, you're up against a weekly boss. 13 to 16's rewards could be as follows. A big one-time Primogem reward for players who manage to clear them regardless of time remaining but does not reset. And the reset rewards can be something else that's super valuable that I'll discuss later in the next section. This way, casuals don't feel the need to be pressured to do 13 to 16 and can instead steadily work towards clearing them at their own pace, knowing that they'll eventually get that Primogem reward, while also not really caring about the reset rewards because it doesn't really apply to them. While hardcore players can grind 13 to 16 every 2 weeks like usual for those special reset rewards because they're items that hardcore players would care about more than casuals. I also want to see more expansions to Abyss, and here are some suggestions. They could add a tower mode, kind of like in Mortal Kombat or Nikke, where you have a ton of floors and each floor gives you rewards when you clear it, with bigger rewards at certain milestones like every 5 or 10 floors, and even bigger ones every 50 or 100 floors or something. They could add a no time limit Abyss mode where you have a series of fights against elite bosses, weekly bosses, and even local legends. The reason why these could have no time limits is so that it's not just a massive DPS check like Abyss currently is, and you can thus use different teams and tactics to fight, including stall teams if you're willing to grind out a fight for an hour or longer if that's what it takes. No food or item buffs though, just you, your characters, and whatever plan you have to take down a particular boss. There could also be 2 versions versions of this mode, one solo and one co-op, or the option to play co-op at least. The solo version could have one-time clear rewards that give lots of primo gems but don't refresh, kind of like Abyss 13 to 16 from earlier, but there could also be a second version that does have primo gem rewards that resets, again, once every 2 weeks or something, that has co-op available but not mandatory. The main inspiration for this no time limit Abyss mode comes from Aether Gazer's Past Grudges game mode, which is similar in that you also fight bosses you faced in story, except it also has a bit of a tower aspect to it, with each stage having 10 floors that you need to go through first in total, and the rewards don't reset. There could also be an endurance or endless Abyss mode where it's just one stage, enemies spawn infinitely but in waves and get progressively stronger and stronger, with elite and even weekly bosses thrown in there every so often, and you fight for as long as you can and see how far you get. To take this one step further, I think endurance and endless could even be separate modes. Endurance would be wave based, where you get a bit of time to prepare for the next wave, like what Snowbreak does for some of its event game modes, but endless would just keep throwing enemies at you constantly. I think food buffs could be allowed, however you can only bring a small amount, for example like 3 revive foods, maybe a couple elemental potions, and that's it, and co-op could also be allowed. Again, there could be a one-time clear primo reward and extra reset rewards that give more primos and other stuff for clearing a certain number of waves every 2 weeks or so. They could also add a dedicated challenge mode where you're up against 2 bosses and you fight them one at a time, so one team for each, but they also have 4 or 5 difficulty levels that you have to go through, and at higher difficulties, the bosses get more attacks, they attack faster, and their special moves also charge up faster, in addition to getting more stats like health and damage. There is a time limit, but no 3-star clears like there are in regular Abyss. Just beat the boss within the time limit, solo only, and no food buffs. And this mode should reset so that way new bosses can rotate in. Ironically, despite this being a challenge mode, in quotes, the first few difficulties should be easy enough that most players, even casuals, should be able to beat them, and that's where the majority of the rewards should be, like primo gems. It's only the last difficulty or 2 that should be the really hard levels and shouldn't have any primos, only have rewards that cater more to hardcore players, as again I'll explain later. One challenge mode that Genshin technically already has are the combat events, where you can give yourself more handicaps to get a better score if you can still beat the boss. This reminds me a lot of Contingency Contract, or CC for short, which is a series of limited time events in Arknights that's more or less the exact same. You have 2 modes, one that's a permanent map that you can play at any time, and another that has a pool of stages that rotates every day. The idea for both modes is that you take handicaps called risks to make the maps harder, and the more risks you can clear a map with, the better your rewards. And if you're able to clear risk 8 for each of the rotating maps and risk 18 for the permanent map, you'll clear most of the event. I think Genshin could just take the events that are like this that it's already had and expand on them a little more, make them their own series of events, and add a dedicated store to them where you can buy things like character skins, primos, essential materials, and others. And out of all the endgame ideas I've suggested here, this is probably the easiest thing they could do, since again we've already had these events before, they just need to expand on them. I also would not mind seeing a leaderboard for these new Abyss game modes, and then a separate leaderboard for the co-op versions of those modes. I know that a lot of people might not want a leaderboard like this, since that implies more rewards that a lot of people won't get, namely the casuals, so this is how I would implement them. Leaderboard rewards should not give primos. Matter of fact, I think they shouldn't give anything too valuable, maybe some Mora, weapon crystals, XP, basic stuff like that. The most I'll suggest is a series of unique name cards or something that commemorate your ranking in each season or something like that, but definitely no primo gems, since a lot of people would get upset over that. Its main purpose should just be for bragging rights. I don't think Genshin should have PvP. PvP in gacha games theoretically is a horrible idea anyway, since there's no realistic way to truly balance it so that's fair for everyone. So the next best idea is to have competitive PvE, where you compete with other players in certain solo game modes for better times or better scores. Think, for example, Girls Frontline 1's ranking maps, and Blue Archive's joint firing drills, raids, and grand assaults that come to mind. It's still not perfect, obviously, since whales and veteran players will still have a huge advantage, but at least your own personal performance won't be directly affected by someone else's like it would in PvP. And again, leaderboards should not give huge rewards like Primo Gems or whatever. That's what you have all the other modes that I suggested earlier for. And lastly, for endgame stuff, add Simulated Universe from Star Rail or another similar kind of permanent roguelike game mode for Genshin. Arknights and Snowbreak are two other gacha games that have their own roguelike game modes, for example, limited time server-wide raid bosses that you can play both solo and co-op, and a permanent separate exploration mode where you have more difficult puzzles, challenges, and enemies for extra rewards. Specifically for this extra exploration mode, I got this idea from Nikke, which has what's called the Lost Sector game mode, where you figure out puzzles while fighting enemies along the way to find all the rewards in each sector, and I figured this would be perfect for Genshin too, since again, exploration is one of its strong points. I've mentioned co-op a lot so far talking about endgame stuff, so this should kinda go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. Optimize the netcode for a better co-op experience. I was playing through the Lantern Rite Events' co-op minigames the other day, and surprise surprise, the netcode in Genshin is still trash. So before any endgame co-op gets added, MiHoYo needs to clean up the netcode first. A few more suggestions to round out the gameplay stuff. When players finish the trials for rate-up characters on a gacha banner, they should get a recruitment ticket that lets them temporarily use one of those rate-up characters, including any of the new ones, in both Overworld and Abyss 9 to 12, for about a week or so. They should also come with their signature weapon and an appropriate artifact set, though they should have fixed stats on those artifacts. This way, players can get a much better idea of whether or not they want to roll for a certain character. Oh, and while we're at it, make the trials themselves get better rewards too, like more Primo Gems or Fates. Allow players to borrow support characters from friends. Obviously, they should be used in domains and weekly fights, but I'm actually not sure how elite bosses and ley lines would work since they're considered overworld fights. Maybe you can buy friend support tickets or something that lets you borrow a friend support for a certain amount of time, and when you do, whoever you borrowed a character from gets some kind of reward like Mora or something. Rerun old events. Genshin has never rerun an event, and while some events have come back, like Lantern Rite and Golden Archipelago, their content is different each time, so I wouldn't really count those as reruns. This is also another thing that is a common staple for gacha games that Genshin, for whatever reason, doesn't do. And because Genshin doesn't do reruns, it is impossible for new players to obtain the welfare 4-star weapons that older players have. Newer free-to-play players can't run Farina with their best free-to-play option, Festering Desire, Albedo with Cinnabar Spindle, or later when she gets her first rerun, Navia with Mega Magic Sword. And I don't know about you, but personally, I think that's pretty bullshit. It's not the player's fault if they missed out on Farina's best weapon that was only available during like a 2 or 3 week long event that took place 2 or 3 years ago if they weren't even playing Genshin at all back then. If MiHoYo had set a precedent of bringing back the old welfare weapons before, then sure, newer players will just have to wait for Festering Desire to come back someday, but it's been 3 years and they haven't rerun anything. So assuming MiHoYo will never do event reruns proper, ideally I think these old 4-star event weapons should instead be made available for purchase at the smiths in each region where it's appropriate. So for example, you can go to Wagner and pick up the blueprints for Festering Desire and Cinnabar Spindle. They should be expensive though, because they were at one point limited event weapons, but that's much better than not having these weapons available at all. And while we're at it, why not bring back old event minigames and make them permanent so that you can play them whenever you want? Maybe add an arcade section somewhere in the Overworld or in the Teapot where you can play them. And I think MiHoYo should also add more content to those minigames, make more challenging levels for them, and have them give you rewards too, like more Primo Gems for beating them. Speaking of an arcade mode actually, it would be amazing if MiHoYo implemented a permanent, fully featured game editor that players can use to make their own game modes and maps. They've technically already done this with several events where you can create your own obstacle courses and share them online for other people to play, and I think this could have StarCraft or Warcraft levels of custom map gameplay. Add an in-depth training mode with co-op to the game. Given how much players like to dissect and analyze characters and their capabilities, I think it's only natural to put in a fully fledged training mode to the game where you can test your characters in different kinds of builds for them. You should be able to select any enemy, put any sort of elemental application on them first, even slow down time, so that you can carefully analyze all the elemental reactions going on, stuff like that. I think it can even be added as an addition to the Serenity pot, so that way it gives hardcore players too a reason to work on their teapots aside from, spamming graphics cards in their houses and calling it a day. And I'm sure people can come up with all kinds of creative training areas in their pots as well and share them with others in game. Increase the FPS cap in Genshin. I don't think I need to explain this one. Uncapped Genshin's frame rate, miHoYo. You're not going to convince PC players to suddenly go out and buy a PS5, or even casuals on their phones, just to play Genshin and just to have a higher frame rate for a stupid gacha game. And no, you'll have to do better than a half-assed Horizon Zero Dawn collab. Oh, and speaking of collabs, add actual collaboration events in Genshin with other IPs. This will probably never happen, but then again, most of the stuff I'm asking for here will likely never happen either, so whatever, I might as well shoot my shot. I think if there ever will be a collab, though, it'll be with another one of miHoYo's IPs, likely Honkai Impact or something, though, if we're gonna be honest with ourselves here, Star Rail will probably get it first before Genshin anyway. And the final gameplay-related suggestion, and perhaps the most impactful one, add a free-to-play item or function that allows you to limit break your characters, and possibly even their weapons too, for that matter, to level 100 or even higher. The idea for this one comes from FGO, where you can use limited time items called Holy Grails to level your characters past their standard maximum levels all the way up to 120. The main appeal of gacha games has always been and will always be the characters, and since FGO was my first one, I have always felt that gacha games should give you a way to make one or a few characters in particular very special because you like them the most. I mean, hell, if you want to get really parasocial here, some games like Girls Frontline and Azure Lane straight up let you marry your own characters. I don't know how well that would go with Genshin. I mean, Genshin fans are already parasocial enough if Twitter is any indication. But the point is, having a way to power up a character past what the game normally allows is still one of the coolest things a gacha game can let you do, and having a character you really like, and knowing that you've made them a lot stronger than they're supposed to be, is still one of the best feelings you can have in gacha games, and so I wish more games would let you do this. As for their weapons, I think when you limit break a character to 100 or something, you should also pick a weapon that will also go to 100 with them, and once you do, that weapon can only be equipped by that level 100 character, though they can still unequip that 100 weapon if you want them to use something else for whatever reason. Moving on to the farming and progression section, starting with rewards. Improve rewards across the board. Daily commissions, daily check-ins, weeklies, battle pass, exploration, adventure rank ladders, sigil ladders, teapot shop, abyss, etc. Anything that gives you some kind of reward or something you can buy, all of it should just give you more stuff. Let me get more specific for some of these. I think daily commissions should give you 150 or 200 primos a day instead of just 60. There should be a proper in-game daily check-in reward system instead of having to go to the HoYoLab website or whatever. Adventure rank ladder rewards should give you more fates or primos and fragile resin, and once you're at AR 60 and you can't level up anymore, the AR ladder should still keep giving you more primos, though how often and how much I don't know. The battle pass should definitely give you more primo gems and fates, especially the free-to-play section, and if you buy the $20 battle pass, they should give you a lot more than just a blueprint and 5 fragile resin. I think minimum 10 frag resin for starters, and we go from there. Matter of fact, they should also do what the Star Rail Battle Pass did recently and just get rid of the dailies and go with weeklies instead. Sigil ladders, it should also give more primos and fates and more frag resin. Teapot shops should also sell primos and more transient or even frag resin instead of just one transient resin a week. And I think that every 30 days that you log into Genshin doesn't have to be consecutive, just cumulative. The game rewards you with a certain amount of primos, say like 800 primo gems or something. This is something FGO does where every 50 days that you log in, the game gives you a full free multi, so it'd be cool to see Genshin do something like that too. Improve expeditions. Currently, expeditions are very mediocre. They don't have great rewards since the best ones are the ones that give you rocks and Mora, and only the Mondstadt and Liyue expeditions can give you rocks. None of the other future ones do. So there's not much of a point doing expeditions in any other region unless you want to do your best Envy or Code impression and become an amateur mint picker yourself. So instead, expeditions should start giving you things like weapon crystals, character XP, artifact XP, and more Mora. Hell, if you want me to get real crazy, I think you should be able to send expeditions into artifact domains themselves. Let's say a 20-hour expedition gets you an extra, I don't know, 10 or so gold artifacts and however many purples, and you should be able to do the same for weapon and talent book domains too. In case you're wondering, well, don't domains cost resin to run? Like, if you can do expeditions into domains for free, wouldn't that be a loophole in the system, so to say? Normally it would be, but this will make more sense later once I start cooking with how I want to change resin when we get to that in a bit. Improve the parametric transformer, which is an item that takes any material you have 150 of and turns them into various kinds of items like weapon crystals, weapon materials, and mora, and resets every 7 days. Currently, the transformer's rewards are totally random, so you don't know what you're going to get until you actually get them. I think the transformer should have a setting that lets you choose what materials you want to get from it. Also, if you haven't used your transformer yet, there should be an account or map notification of some kind letting you know that the transformer's rewards are available, and it should also be on a static weekly reset like bounties, since currently its cooldown only starts when you actually use it. Improve friendship. All characters in the game have friendship meters, but other than maybe unlocking some extra voice lines in their profiles and giving you their unique name cards when you hit friendship 10 or whatever, I don't know what else they're supposed to do. So what I would do is I would reduce the amount it takes to max out a character's friendship and make them more meaningful. For example, they could make it so that characters get slightly higher stats the higher friendship level they are, which is what Arknights does with their trust system. Also, each individual friendship level up should reward you with more primo gems or fates, and hitting max friendship should give you more stuff than just their name card, like, extra fates and more intimate voice lines. This is what FGO does with its own bond system. From bonds 1 to 5, you unlock more parts of a character's profile and lore. From bond 6 to 9, you get more gacha currency. Bond 10 gives you that character's unique equipment, so to say. And if you want to go further beyond that, bonds 11 to 15 gets you even more gacha currency. Just don't ask me how long or how much it takes to grind bond in FGO. Alrighty, time to talk about Resin, the stamina system of Genshin. It's clear that Resin needs an overhaul, and in my video last year I called for the complete removal of Resin, but now I've actually changed my mind. I don't want to remove Resin, just change how it works. I think that anything that currently costs Resin should be free. They should no longer cost Resin by default. However, you should still have the option to spend Resin to get even more rewards from them. For example, the highest difficulty artifact domain by default should give you, let's say 2 gold artifacts at AR45 at no cost. But if you want to spend 40 resin on it, it doubles your rewards and gives you 4 gold artifacts per run guaranteed. In other words, I want to overhaul Resin in such a way that people can grind materials for as much as they want for as long as they want, because now domains are free and don't cost resin. But they can accelerate their grind by spending resin that still accumulates naturally over time. This way, it should satisfy everyone. Casual players don't need to worry about needing to log in every day to spend their resin to avoid being inefficient, since now resin is just a pure bonus as opposed to being a resource that they have to manage every day, and hardcore players can grind as much as they want to min-max their artifacts. In addition, Genshin should also increase its resin cap to 240 and reduce the time it takes for resin to regen down to 1 point every 6 minutes instead of 8 minutes like it currently is, so basically just like how Star Rail does it. Star Rail also has a stamina bank system where if your main Trailblaze power gauge maxes out at 240, your account still keeps accumulating stamina, just at a heavily reduced rate, and this second stamina bar can hold up to 2400 Trailblaze power, meaning that you can go up to a whole week without playing Star Rail, and your account will still keep getting energy. So yeah, add that to Genshin too. Make talent book and weapon material domains offer everything at once instead of having them rotate every day. Star Rail has individual nodes where you can farm for talent and weapon upgrade materials without needing to worry about, daily rotations like you would with Genshin. And I think Genshin should do that too, so that you can farm for whatever you need at any time. Couple of things for weekly boss farming. Make Dream Solvents a guaranteed drop, so 1 per weekly boss fight. Dream Solvents themselves should also be used to convert older weekly boss materials into newer ones, and since I did suggest earlier that old welfare event weapons should be made craftable or at least obtainable from the blacksmiths and that they should be expensive, they should also cost a Dream Solvent or 2, or more if you really want to buy or make or something like that. You should also be able to choose exactly what sets of artifacts you want your weekly boss and elite boss fights for that matter to drop, so instead of them being, Gladiator and Wanderer's trope all the time, maybe you can set them to others like Emblem or Golden trope, and you should be able to repeatedly get rewards from the same weekly boss up to 3 times, again just like how Star Rail does it. Normal enemies and regional specialties should respawn after a much shorter period of time. Currently, regular enemies in the overworld don't respawn until daily reset, and regional specialties don't respawn until at least 2.5 days, maybe 3 days later. I think they should respawn much faster than that, like every couple of hours, let's say. Provide more ways for players to obtain transient or fragile resin. Even with the overhaul suggestion to resin that I made earlier, I still think it's important to provide players with more ways to get transient and fragile resin, and I've alluded to this in a few points throughout the video so far, whenever I mentioned that some things like, the sigil ladder and the teapot shop should give you more fragile resin as part of their rewards or when you buy them, for example. Here's another big topic, artifacts. All artifact sets should be in the strongbox. New artifacts shouldn't be excluded like they are now, like, 2 regions behind and all that. And whenever we get new ones in the future, they should immediately be added to strongbox too. Keep expanding artifact inventory space. I think we have 1,800 currently, if I'm not mistaken. I think we should have at least 2,500. Add the self-modeling resin item from Star Rail to Genshin, though I will say that would be the easy way out. What would be even better is if artifact domains could allow you to pick which set between the 2 that they offer that you want to farm for, and make it more likely that you'll get artifacts from that set. Not only that, but there could also be a sort of artifact pity system which should go like this. Before you enter an artifact domain, you can input the artifact type and main stat that you want, for instance an energy recharge emblem timepiece for your Raiden. After doing a certain number of runs in that domain, you should be guaranteed a 5-star ER emblem timepiece, even if some of the gold artifacts you farmed along the way already gave you some of the exact pieces you were looking for. Snowbreak has the closest to what I described here. When you farm for logistics squads, the equivalent of artifacts in Genshin, you fill up what's called an application bar that lets you redeem 1 free logistics officer from the squad of your choice in case you don't get the officers from the squad you want through manual farming, though it's still random who exactly you get from that squad. Aether Gazer also has a guarantee system that helps you get the exact sigil you want. You can pinpoint what sigil set you want to farm, and not only will all the sigils you get from manual farming be of that set, but you're also guaranteed a gold sigil of that set if you do enough runs without getting one. But because even this guaranteed sigil will still have a random position, you can also burn unwanted gold sigils for a currency that you can use to exchange for a sigil of the exact set and position you're looking for. This is a little different from what I'd like to see Genshin do. The point of me bringing this up is to give you a couple examples of what other gacha games do to make gear farming more tolerable. Anyway, back to Genshin. The substats on the guaranteed piece should still be random, and the reason why is this. I think another item should be added that lets you manipulate substats to a degree. For this, I'm advocating for the substat system in Nikke. In this game, when a character equips a gold gear piece that both matches their class and their manufacturer, basically their faction if you will, and that piece is leveled to +5, you then have the option of using an item called a custom module that then ascends this gear piece to tier 10, a process called overloading. Overloading also does 2 more things. It allows this piece to be leveled up another 5 times, but more importantly, it randomly rolls up to 3 different substats for that piece from a pool of stats that you see here. But it doesn't stop there. It's not like in Genshin where once an artifact rolls all 4 substats, that's it. If you don't like them, you gotta go farm a whole nother piece. Instead, in Nikke, if you don't like the substats that an overloaded piece got, you can then spend more custom modules to re-roll them and try going for a whole new set of substats. But that's not all. If you get a subset or 2 that you actually want, and you still want to keep min-maxing that piece for a perfect substat lineup, you can lock the substats that you like and keep rolling for that last substat without worrying about losing the ones you already got. And even better, because gear substats in Nikke can also randomly roll different values, just like in Genshin, you can also specifically re-roll the value of one particular substat if it rolled a little too low for your liking. Now, to be fair, these mechanics are more necessary in Nikke because when you overload a character's gear, that piece is forever tied to them and you can no longer take it off them. Not to mention, everything here costs custom modules. Overloading, re-rolling substats, locking substats even, and re-rolling substat values. And the more heavily you invest into a single piece, the more and more expensive it gets to further min-max it. Not to mention, those custom module items are an endgame resource and take a while to accumulate. But I still think that a main stat and substat system like what I've explained here would make artifact farming in Genshin so much more manageable and reasonable for everyone. The main stat guarantee makes sure that even casual players can run the artifact sets that they want for their characters without having to worry about, grinding for hours. and the substat min-maxing gives hardcore players an actually reasonable chance to grind for perfect or near perfect artifacts as opposed to the complete YOLO nature of artifact grinding as it is now. This will probably be my most controversial take, but hear me out. With all these suggestions I've made so far, notably the removal of resin from farming and all the endgame ideas I've pitched, I think we should either increase the gold artifact enhancement cap from plus 20 to plus 24, or make a higher rarity of artifacts that allow plus 24 enhancements. But since that would also imply, 6-star artifacts, and I'm not sure if people will be okay with the idea of 6-star characters go with that, it'll likely be the former. To give some more details about this plus 24 idea, you would need a special upgrade material of some kind to limit break a plus 20 gold artifact in order to get to plus 24 in the first place. And not only would doing this give you a 6th substat roll as you might expect, but when it hits plus 24, I think the artifact should also give you a special 5th substat line that's separate from the regular 4 lines. This 5th substat is a random buff that it rolls from a pool of buffs, similar to how, regular substats roll, but the buffs themselves are much different. For example, you can roll buffs like a permanent skill cooldown reduction that can stack if you have multiple copies of this buff across plus 24 artifacts, extra elemental damage but only for the element that the character has, extra plunge damage, extra range damage, extra skill damage, extra ult damage, extra energy regen, etc. To take this a step further, I think you should be able to pick between 2 versions of this 5th line, one that only rolls buffs that has stronger values but are only for the user, and another that only rolls buffs that have weaker values but apply to the user's entire team. This way there's still a good reason to give your supports plus 24 artifacts as well as your DPSs. And if you don't like how this 5th line rolled, you can always re-roll it by spending more of the same material from earlier that you used to plus 24 the artifact. And again, the inspiration for this idea comes from games like Snowbreak and Nikke, where you can do something very similar to further enhance your character's gear. However, I want to make it clear that I think you should still be able to clear all endgame content with your current plus 20 artifacts if you don't feel like, dragging your ass through artifact grinding all over again. They should only be meant for hardcore players who are trying to go for top scores or best times on the leaderboards, or even just players who just like min-maxing gear on their characters. These items, the self-modeling resin from Star Rail, assuming we're going with that, the new item that helps you min-max substats, and the special material that limit breaks your gold artifacts to plus 24 and gives you that 5th substat, should all be part of the reset rewards for clearing the new endgame modes that I suggested earlier, in addition to being available for purchase in various shops in the game, and being rewards from Sigil Ladder, AR Ladder, and other such ladders. They should even be part of event shop rewards, so that way casual players too can eventually gear up their characters to plus 24 without ever having to touch any endgame stuff. It's just that you'll get more of these items and be able to optimize your character's gear faster if you do participate in endgame content. But the point is, I want everyone to be able to get these new items. It shouldn't matter if you're a casual or a hardcore or anything in between. I think everyone should at least have the choice to grind the game however much you want, but at the same time, again, not be forced to grind if you don't want to. Add proper gear loadouts. This should be another obvious quality of life buff that we should have had since the beginning, but we should have loadouts for characters that you can configure specific artifacts and weapons for. This way you can much more easily swap artifacts and weapons among your characters, because not everyone can currently grind the game like me to the point where they have every single character with their own weapon and artifact set. Older games like Azure Lane and even Honkai Impact, one of MiHoYo's own games for God's sake, have loadouts, so I don't see why Genshin can't have them either. Add more crowns. The solid majority of crowns that were ever available in Genshin were part of limited time events, so if you're a new player, guess what? Just like the 4-star event weapons, you'll never be able to get these again. This is why event reruns are so important, and yet again why it's so weird and stupid that Genshin doesn't do them. More crowns should be added as permanent content. You should be able to buy them from sigil shops that reset now that chests also respawn from my suggestion earlier, get them as part of the free-to-play battle pass or as extra rewards from the AR ladder, and receive them as part of your first time clear rewards from the endgame modes. And finally, returning player bonuses bonuses should be improved as well, along with all these suggestions, because assuming that any of these actually get added, you'll of course bring back a number of inactive players. So, more primo gems, more fates, more leveling materials, maybe even a crown or two. I think returning players should also get a special temporary recruitment ticket, similar to the one I mentioned before, that has a small pool of limited characters that they can try for a week, with the character choices weighted towards those who've come out while the players weren't playing Genshin, so that way they can see what they've missed out on. And to give more incentive to keep those returning players playing, there should be extra objectives that they can do, like log in for another 10 days total or something, that give them even more primo gems and other rewards. I'm sure the current returning player program does something like this already, so just make it give better rewards. To wrap up this gameplay section, I want to emphasize that miHoYo should not forego the usual casual content just to develop all this endgame stuff. Casual content is the heart of this game, and contrary to popular online belief, hardcore players, however many of us there are online, complaining about how, Genshin has no endgame, do not make up the vast majority of the Genshin player base. The casuals and the normies do. And we know that miHoYo does not want to lose the casual audience, because they're the ones who pay for the bills at the end of the day. So I'm not asking for all this endgame stuff all at once. If they ever will add more endgame content, doubtful, I know, but if they ever do, it should be in bits and pieces at a time, so that way they can still stick to their original content schedule of region expansions and character creation. That being said, I do think miHoYo is more than capable of handling endgame content this way, and hopefully at some point they actually do. Just remind me to go refill my hopium canisters sometime this week. I think they got some at Home Depot or something, I don't know. The final section here covers improvements to gacha, premium shops, microtransactions, and other miscellaneous suggestions. Let's start with the prices. I've always thought premium currency packs you find in any gacha game, not just Genshin for that matter, were way too expensive, and of course Genshin is no different. Some suggestions would be to reduce pack prices, so for example $100 down to 80 or lower, reduce the cost of rolling gacha down to 1200 primo gems or lower, or make the packs themselves have more value. So for instance, the $100 packs now give you 10,000 primo gems instead of 8,000 like they do now. If miHoYo ever does anything like this, and obviously that is a huge if, then they can make and sell more character skins to make up for the difference. miHoYo can definitely make more skins for more characters. Honestly, I think it's pretty criminal that a game like Genshin doesn't go harder on skins than they do. I mean, I had people come to my chat back when 4.4 first dropped and tell me that Shenhe's and Ganyu's skins made them want to roll them just so they can use the new skins. So I think skins will always be in high demand. Speaking of skins, remove Genesis crystals and just make packs give you primo gems directly. The only reason why Genesis crystals exist as a currency is to prevent free-to-play players from being able to buy premium items like bundles and costumes. Like honestly, if you're free-to-play and you think it's worth it to use your precious primo gems to buy like a costume or even a bundle for whatever reason, then you should be able to do that. And ideally, I also want costumes to have a fixed price, as in you just pay for a skin directly rather than have to first buy a pack of Genesis crystals and then buy the skin. It's just that miHoYo would also have to make sure that buying the skins with either primos or money would be the exact same. Add more 4-star characters, both as free event rewards like in Lantern Rite or other events, and to Star Glitter and even Star Dust shop. One of the reasons why Lantern Rite is such a good event is because it always offers a free 4-star Liyue character, but I do wish miHoYo could put out another big event that also gives out a free 4-star that you can pick. I'm not saying to replace Lantern Rite. It's supposed to be Chinese New Year, and Genshin's a Chinese game obviously, so I think Lantern Rite should be a mainstay event. I'm just saying to have a second event that's on a similar scale to Lantern Rite in the second half of the year and have it also offer a free 4-star character that you can pick from a particular region wherever it takes place. Star Glitter's shop should also offer 2 more 4-stars. One of them should always be one of the 3 Mondstadt 4-star characters, Amber, Lisa, and Kea, and at least another one should always be a 4-star from a currently running rate up. And if there's a new 4-star character, make sure that they're in Star Glitter shop that month. Stardust shop should also have 1 4-star character available for purchase every month too. While we're on the topic of Star Glitter and Stardust shops, permanent 5-star weapons and gacha limited 4-star weapons should be added to Star Glitter, while permanent 4-star weapons should be added to Stardust. Star Rail has permanent 5-star light cones that you can buy directly once a month if you can afford it from their equivalent of Star Glitter shop, so I think Genshin should do the same and then some. Okay, Future Tuhu here. The 4.5 preview stream teased a new Chronicled Wish banner where you can guarantee a 5-star character or weapon of your choice out of 6 characters, which includes some perma characters, or a pool of 5-star weapons that include all the perma 5 stars, Eula's signature, and most importantly, beacon and hunter's path. You first set who or what your guarantee will be, either a character or a weapon. If you pick a character, all the 5 stars you get while rolling on this banner will be characters, and if you pick a weapon, all your 5 stars will be weapons, so the pools are separated. I have 2 main questions for this new banner. First, will there be a Chronicled Wish banner every patch? As in, will every patch from 4.5 onwards feature this new banner? It just rotates in new characters and weapons? Because the Hoyoverse article says that it'll be available from time to time, but what does that mean exactly? And second, what type of currency will it cost? Because if it ends up costing intertwined fates, which I think it will unfortunately, you know, the same currency you use for limited banners, then ain't nobody gonna want to roll this whack-ass banner, because why the hell would you waste your precious intertwines on old content, right? If MiHoYo put, I don't know, Ganyu and Shenhe on there maybe, so that, you know, people could go roll them so that they can use their recent skins that they just bought, then that's one thing, but Eula, Klee, and Albedo? Huh? Are you serious? The ideal scenario for this Chronicled Wish banner to actually be worth something is if it's a new mainstay banner that you can roll at any time, and it costs a Quaint Fates, the one that you use exclusively for the permanent Wanderlust banner right now, and not Intertwines. If both of these are true, then I think this banner is a good idea, because now players have a way to guarantee themselves a 5-star permanent character or weapon that they've been looking for, and Beacon and Hunter's Path are back and are no longer in limbo like they were for the past year or two. But I just don't think this will be the case. The Chronicle banner could be a permanent addition, sure, but I find it highly unlikely that they'll let you roll it with Acquaintance, because if that were the case, then no one's gonna ever want to roll the Wanderlust banner ever again. Unless, of course, the Chronicle banner replaces Wanderlust, but I don't think the article mentions that explicitly. Whatever the case, the existence of this Chronicle banner now means that MiHoYo is definitely not making the changes I want them to in regards to Star Glitter and Stardust shops, so my suggestions still stand, even if MiHoYo won't implement them for at least another 3 years or something, if at all. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. Replace Genshin's current atrocity of a weapon banner with Star Rails. Make it solo rate up only and 75-25 chance. Since weapon banner at this point doesn't need Epitomized path anymore, put it into character gacha instead, so that way you can guarantee yourself a 4-star character after you've gotten 2 others that you didn't want. And make Epitomized path carry over between banners, in case I didn't already mention this at some point earlier. Currently, the Epitomized path points on weapon banner do not carry over when weapon banners switch. Only the rolls you've done on them without getting a 5-star do. And the fate points on the new Chronicle banner are gonna work the same way, but I think MiHoYo should let you carry them over between banners. And of course, everyone's favorite topic, the free 5-star. This should be an anniversary only thing, but yes, I think everyone should be able to pick a free permanent 5-star character as part of their anniversary rewards. However, because the permanent character pool is still pretty small, I also want to suggest making some limited time characters permanent too, like Ito and Albedo. Friendly reminder that we still don't have a permanent Geo character yet for some reason. In addition to that, also as part of anniversary rewards, players should get a special limited time rate up banner where they get to pick which limited 5-star and which 3 4-stars they want to roll for. In other words, a custom banner that you can build. There may have to be a limit to how recent the characters can be. I don't know, personally I don't really have a problem with there being no time limit. And finally, some miscellaneous stuff. Expand NPC stock animations and introduce new body models. Make Ito and Ridsley actually buff like they're meant to be. And allow for character appearance customization. What I mean is, do you want your characters to have long hair or short hair? Do you want Mona to take off her hat? Is your name Atsu and you just want to see Zhongli go shirtless for no real reason in particular? Do you want to see Raiden with her hair loose and not up in a pigtail or whatever? Or Novelette with his hair up in a ponytail? Basically, I want there to be a sort of modular appearance customization system where you can change small details about or even add accessories to your characters that suit your preferences so that your account and your characters feel like more your own. Last but certainly not least, I think Genshin should add regional languages and an individual language toggle for all characters. The inspiration for this comes from Arknights because in this game, not only does it offer English, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean voices just like Genshin does, but it also has specific Chinese dialects and even Russian and Italian dubs for some of their characters.
A Siracusa in molti cercano di prevedere le mie mosse. Non è così difficile. Faccio semplicemente ciò che voglio e aiuto chi ha bisogno. Doc, lasciamo le cose come stanno. Non troverai amici fidati in quel posto.
Vuoi sapere cos'è successo tra me e Texas? Non hai proprio idea dei guai in cui ti stai cacciando, vero? Un giorno scoprirai la verità, ma non da me.
Погасить пламя войны можно лишь ценой долгих страданий. А чтобы разжечь его, хватит и одного заблуждения.
Доктор, кушать хотите? У вас в животе бурчит так, что за милю слышно, будто гроза на улице.
Apropos, wer war dein vorheriger Assistent? Ich will ja nicht rumschnüffeln, aber meine Fähigkeiten beschränken sich auf den friedlichen Diskurs zur Poesie.
Ich werde dir heute assistieren, Doktor. Hierzu muss ich allerdings sagen, dass ich keinerlei Erfahrung als Sekretär habe. Um dich nicht aufzuhalten, werde ich also einfach gar nichts tun.
Har du samma sorts drömmar som jag? Förmodligen inte. Vi är ju inte i Sami. Så det är tur för dig att skuggorna inte kommer förfölja dig i dina drömmar.
Titles and positions are both meaningless. The knights of the Neural family do not require recognition to walk their paths. Even in modern Kazimierz, where every path leads to darkness. Tada, Dest.
All my tasks must relate to the sea or Iberia. Huh? You have too much work? Okay. I'll make some time to help you out.
Drak. A man I hardly want to reunite with, outside of writing. It's been so long.
Uberiruki!
Apologies. That wasn't intentional.
How do you sleep after having witnessed so much cruelty? If I could do the same as you, with a simple shut of my eyes, would I feel any better?
You're still not done assigning tasks? I'll wait a bit longer then.
Not a word needed. It's always so tranquil by your side.
Knight of the Tower Isabella Montague. On behalf of Siege and our little alliance, I express our sincerest gratitude. What do you mean I don't dress like a knight? Looks can be bloody deceiving!
And you can have different characters speak different languages at the same time based on your preferences, rather than have all your characters be forced to speak in whatever language you set your game to. There's no reason why Genshin can't do this too, at least I don't think so. In addition to adding a German dub for Mondstadt characters, Arabic and Hindi for Sumeru, and French for Fontaine. Oh, and while we're at it, improve the translations for the languages that need them, like Italian, because apparently the Italian localization for Genshin isn't very good from what I've heard, so I imagine other localizations might have similar issues, and add more localizations like Arabic in case that isn't already in the game yet. Future Tuhu here again, making a last minute addition because I forgot to include this earlier in the gameplay section, but I would like to see Team Elemental Bursts, or Team Ultimates. This is one of the feature mechanics of Aether Gazer, where if you run 2 or even 3 specific characters on the same team, and they all charge up their ultimates, they can perform what's called an ultimate skill chain that's more powerful than their individual ults and has a special animation. I think this would easily be one of the coolest features of Genshin 2, as we have lots of characters in the game who could perform team ults together. Ganyu and Shunha, even though they're both cryo, maybe even throw Shenyan in there too for a triple team ult, Mona and Fischl, Diluc and Kea, even though Diluc might not agree to it, Ito and Cookie, Ayaka and Ayato, Dehya and Candace, Alhaitham and Kava, or even Sino, Farina and Novelette, Navia and Clorin when she comes out, the list goes on and on. Final thing, I promise. Add clans, or more appropriately, guilds to Genshin. Even though Genshin is meant to be a single-player gacha for the most part, I think the more multiplayer or co-op functions the game has, the more enjoyable it becomes for the player base as a whole, and guilds are another social outlet for players to enjoy the game together. Plenty of other single-player gacha games have guilds, and some of them even have in-game global chat rooms where people can hang out, though with how much MiHoYo censors their own chat boxes, I'm sure the mere thought of global chat rooms is enough to give the higher-ups heart attacks. Guilds, on the other hand, shouldn't be an issue, so that'd be nice to have. And there you have it, my own personal list of improvements and suggestions to make Genshin Impact a better game. Of course, I'm only one person, so I can't think of everything that could make Genshin better. I'm sure there are plenty of other things that you guys may have in mind yourselves that you think would also improve the game, so feel free to share them in the comments below. My next big Genshin video will be an updated video on how to play every character in the game, so make sure to like this video and subscribe to know when that comes out. I also dual stream to both Twitch and YouTube, so feel free to follow my Twitch channel or look for a YouTube stream if you want to hang out and talk about Genshin or other gacha games. Other than that, thanks for watching.